Okay, good morning or afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Metrics Data 360's webinar this afternoon on unlocking success, navigating the maze of software license and compliance. So throughout this presentation, please use this as interactive. There's both the chat feature. If you're watching through the Teams, sorry if you're on LinkedIn, unfortunately, or YouTube, where we're broadcasting to as well, you won't be able to interact with us. But if you do have questions, you can hit the chat. Put up your hand, raise your hand, or drop a question in the Q&A. I'll watch those and try and answer those throughout the presentation today. So I did want to start with why this topic's important, because we're seeing a lot. We get asked a lot of the times, like, what do we see going on in the world of kind of software licensing today? And one of the things that's definitely going on is vendor consolidation. There's a lot of activity happening around this. I mean, if you look this week alone, Broadcom finally closed on the VMware deal. Flexera announced or entered into an agreement to purchase Snow Software. And, basically this is happening because, in my opinion, they're all trying to grab market share, particularly while prices are down, or stock prices are compressed a little bit with some of the challenges in the global economy. But the reason that they do that is the greater the market share, the more pricing power they have. Microsoft has taught all these software vendors that when you have market share, you own pricing power. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot is the move to subscription and cloud licenses really driven their share prices and costs up. Right. So what does this really equate to? Like, what is it that we're actually seeing happening in the market? Right. So one of the things that I think all companies need to be prepared for is decreasing discounts. If you got a 50% discount on a deal last time with, a vendor, don't expect to get 50% again. They're all decreasing the amount of discount that they're giving out. We're seeing much more activity around increased pricing, whether that's disguised as currency adjustments or whether it's just price increases that we haven't seen before. Right? Like if you look at Microsoft as an example here, Microsoft for years never had price increases. I mean, I think all from like 1995 right up until late 2010, they never had a price increase on Office, where now we're seeing price increases on the Office 365 suite every couple of years. Not always on all the SKUs, but we're definitely seeing that. There's a lot of changes in licensing that's driving revenue. Some of that's that subscription-based stuff that we talked about. I mean, we'll see what Broadcom does with VMware, but VMware went from perpetual processor-based licenses to core licenses that were subscription only. If you look at the things that Citrix doing, if you use Citrix in terms of what they're trying to do around cloud licensing and things like that, obviously, one of the big concerns out there from a compliance perspective is Oracle's change to Java licensing, where they've taken Java from processor and named user to based on the total number of employees and the expense that's associated with that. And we're seeing more and more bundling, which equals more vendor lockout. I mean, Microsoft E5 and their move into security and bundling in and pushing people up into that E5 suite and with security and compliance in there is just a great example of that. And so, what does this really look like? This is a real example. This is not a Microsoft. This is a smaller vendor or publisher that we helped a client with. But they basically, I put in here kind of tongue in cheek, pick a vendor, any vendor, because this is what's happening across the board, right? So this client had a user-based license for 5,000 employees. They negotiated a deal 5 years ago. At the time, the license was $25 per employee per month, and they'd received a 40% discount. The renewal's coming up. They've been negotiating this contract renewal for a few months now, actually. The vendor increased the list price on this product from $25 to $30. They had no future price protection, and for 8 to 12 weeks now, the vendor's been holding tight on offers at a 25% discount. So not only did they face the 20% price increase of 25 to $30 per user, they're receiving fewer discounts. And the publisher's actually saying that they have a new policy where they don't discount like they used to, right? So what does this equate to in real life? Let's just take a look at this math, right? 5 years ago, they had 5,000 employees at $25 a month, and they got a 40% discount. It was a $900,000 a year contract. Today, that same 5,000 employees is 1.35, right? So it's a 435,000 per year increase, or nearly 50%. So I can guarantee you the company, when they were doing their budgeting last year and looked at their renewals, they budgeted about 10 to 20% increase. We know that because they told us that, but where do they make up that shortfall? Right. So, regardless of the size of the company, that's a significant shortfall in budget. Now, this project is paid within the business. The business doesn't have, like, within a business unit, This is not a product that they can easily just go out and find $400,000 in difference, right? So now they're struggling. What do we do? How do we manage this? Like, how do we get around that? So even though we were talking, today kind of about licensing and how licensing works and how to remain compliant, this is what I want you to be thinking about throughout the day, because if this hasn't happened to you already or hasn't happened to your company, it's about to start happening very soon, because this is the behavior of every vendor out there. Like I said, I won't name the vendor here, but this is a smaller software publisher that has a SaaS based subscription model, that these guys are just throwing their hands up going, how do you justify this? Nothing's changed in the way that they use it. They're not using all the functionality, so how do you get around that? So we're going to talk about some of that today. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Assa. I'm the founder and CEO of Microsoft, or sorry, here at Metrics Data 360. I worked at Microsoft for about 10 years in the licensing group. I negotiated about $2 billion of contracts where, and it was there. I've helped organizations since I left 10 years ago negotiate much more than that. My focus is really helping organization beat their glass, the software vendors. And just to give you a little bit of my background, sort of why I'm so passionate about this, why I started Metrics Data 360 and why we really focus so heavily on we're in the software asset management space. So for those of you that aren't familiar, we provide software asset management services, whether that's help, negotiate contracts, defend an audit, help with quality of CMDB data, right up to running SAM as a service for our client. I won't get into the details of our services today, but we have a pretty wide breadth of services. But the reason that I started this is, like, when I was a kid, my mom was actually an IT manager at a small company. I grew up in a small town, and it was probably one of the best jobs in town. And I remember my mom having lots of sleepless nights, and I didn't really understand it because I think I was probably my early teens. I know that she had talked quite a bit about them threatening to move the plant from our town to Mexico due to cost savings opportunities. And I know she was trying to do everything she could. This is back in the day, like, pre-cloud. It was, box product, volume license agreements, hardware contracts. She was looking at all that, trying to work with her vendors to try and find ways to save money, to do what she could to save jobs. And I remember sitting at the table one night and her coming home and just sort of walking straight by me and in the kitchen table doing homework. And she literally walked straight by me, which was unlike her, not to kind of stop and see, how my day was. And she went into her bedroom and I could hear her crying. And that was the day that she found out that they were closing the plant. And so, fast forward a few years later, I kind of said, well, that's never going to happen to me. And when I got at Microsoft and I was sort of on this path, to move up the ranks and things like that, I thought I'd made it, right? Like, I'm with big company, I got all this security. But really what happened is in 2008, when the first recession sort of hit, they were asking me to go out and sell 20, 30% more to my clients. And at that time, I was supporting primarily the automotive industry. And so they were telling me, go sell 20 or 30% more to them. Meanwhile, my customers are flying to Washington, begging for money to save their companies, not just jobs. They were laying off tens of thousands of people. And they were telling me that if I couldn't figure out a way to sell 20 or 30% more to them while this was going on, that I actually wasn't good at my job. And I remember sitting at home, sleepless nights, going, what the heck is going on? Like, why do I not feel great? And when my daughter asked me what was wrong, at the time she was pretty young, I knew right away. It just sort of hit me. I knew exactly what to do. I knew how to play the game with licensing. I knew how to push these guys and get 20 or 30% more out of these clients, but it didn't align with my values, right? And so that's when I left and started Metrics. And we're very passionate about helping organizations get the data they need to purchase the stuff that they need. And this is a core reason why, right? So coming into this, we always ask people, like, what sort of things do you want us to talk about based on this topic? And I know we put about staying compliant, but we're going to put a little bit different spin on this today, because even when you look at these questions, like understanding the truth of entitlements versus consumption, the changing rules of licensing, the bandwidth to track this stuff, right? Like, you can see the bandwidth to track time, right? You know license management, the constant change, cost, all of these things are part and parcel of having to understand licensing. And how is it that I knew how to go and get 20 or 30% more? How is it that Microsoft and IBM and these guys are constantly getting more out of you, even though your budgets are shrinking, right? And so we're going to talk about how the basis of how you do that today, okay? And so that really starts with what is a license. And a lot of the times there's a big confusion around what is a license and what is a contract that you purchase licenses through, right? So license is the right to use software. It's not ownership of the software, right? That's definitely something that a lot of people misunderstand. Is it's not ownership. Even if you have a perpetual license, you have a right to use the software. You don't own the software. The license defines your rights. Typically, that means how you can use the software. It's going to have legal conditions in it. Such things as limitations, liabilities, warranties, disclaimers, all of that sort of stuff. And it's going to define how software is paid for, right? So the license metric, more on that here in a few minutes, that's used to calculate cost, the price of the license, and whether you have access to the source code or not. So is it proprietary software? Is it open source? And we're not going to go into a lot of detail on that today, but I think the main thing to understand is that you don't have ownership of the product. It's the right to use it, and those rights and how you use it are defined by the licenses. Okay. Now, what type of licenses are there, right? Because this is, again, where sometimes people get confused, and your rights change even depending on how you buy a product, if you're buying through these different types of licenses, right? So you have OEM licenses, or what, original equipment manufacturing licenses. The most, prominent example of that is the Windows operating system that comes with the desktop or laptop, right? When you buy the desktop or laptop, it has an OEM license with it. Now, the rights associated with that are in what Microsoft calls an end user license agreement, or a EULA. That states all of those things: what you can do with it, how many times you can copy it, can you share it, all of those sorts of things are included in that EULA, right? You can get software that you download. I put downloaded software. I probably should have put downloaded or used just on the web, right? So you got software that you download. There's still some box product out there. You can go to Best Buy and purchase, some. Sorry, I don't know why that thing keeps popping up. You can go to Best Buy and purchase some, box product. There's still a little bit of that out there. There's commercial agreements, such as enterprise agreements. That's the big one. Most people on here work for large enterprises, and so there's going to be commercial software contracts that you're purchasing through. And the other thing that I put in here is, there's these term licenses, there's licenses, and types, right? You got term licenses, which are subscriptions, versus perpetual licenses, which in theory you own the rights to use, forever, more or less. Although they make that even difficult to do nowadays, right? But the reality is there's different ways that you buy stuff, right? And typically, when most organizations are thinking about software licensing or compliance, they're thinking about the agreements. They're thinking about the fourth bullet point there. They're not thinking about what this truly is, what is the license truly, and they don't think about the different ways that you can actually buy these things. They might think in terms of subscription versus perpetual. If a vendor still offers both, most vendors are moving purely to subscriptions. Based on what we started out with, it's just so much easier when you have no choice, you have no option to walk away. You have to renew, and they can decrease your discounts and increase your prices, right? So the next piece that comes into play is license metrics, right? And so license metrics are typically the way, or the license metrics are the way that you count the number of licenses that you require. And then that license metric would have a price associated with it. So, there's hundreds and hundreds of these, right? I've put a few of the most common, like you have device-based. So, if I install it on a desktop, I have to buy a license for the desktop. There's user-based, there's processor core-based. Microsoft's famous for their server cal model. We've seen contracts that are based on the revenue that you associate with. IBM loves these things called processor value units, and it goes on and on and on, right? The reality is, like I said, there's hundreds of these, and certain products you can buy in multiple different license metrics and through different license programs and terms. So let's just take a simple example that's still out there that you can do, which is Office. right? Traditional perpetual Office was device-based. I can still buy device-based licenses for Office. I can also buy Office user-based. I can buy Office 365, which they're now call it the Office in their Microsoft 365 enterprise apps. I can buy that product even though it's a subscription, user-based or device-based. Now, what I can do with it, how I count and who can use it is defined elsewhere, but I can still buy that both ways. Now, I can buy that through an online download. I could buy that through a program, through a reseller like open licensing, or what Microsoft calls their cloud and solution provider program, the CSP program. I can buy that through an MPSA. I can buy that through an EA. I can even get Office today through OEM when I buy a Dell piece of hardware, right? So you can see that there's a ton of options, right? And the challenge is most people, especially large enterprises, are going to think about when I buy Office, I'm buying that through an enterprise agreement and in my Microsoft or Office 365 today, right? But we just went through, there's like 10, 15, 20 different options. And so which option is the best, right? And this is where, if I go back to the questions, slide 4, 5, 6 here, sorry. When I go back to the questions, the confusion and the constant change, that's sort of what drives it, is the options. But those options, when you simplify them, actually can become very powerful to you, and you can leverage those in your negotiations and in your compliance positions, right? So I can give you an example. I'm going to go to license metrics here, okay? So we have a client that was in an audit, and they were looking at licensing based on PVUs, right? So this was obviously an IBM audit, and they were looking at licensing based on PVUs. Now, we noticed that they had some named user licenses, okay? And when we looked at their dev environment that they were assigning PVU licenses to, it was very expensive based on a number of processors that calculation ended up doing. But when we looked at their users that were in there was only like 25. And they had all these user-based licenses that could cover those 25 users, right? So they were taking the simple approach. Let's just cover the entire environment through PVU. But when we showed them how to get the data for the users and showed them the impact of that, they were able to reduce the number of licenses and the dollar amount of the licenses that they needed substantially, right? And so sometimes you have to look at the mix and the match, right? Sometimes easier is not better. And when I get down a little bit further, we're going to talk about how easier is not always better, and how it can end up costing millions of dollars. Okay. So what I want to talk about is, there's been a lot of discussion. Like I said, I know we're talking primarily about compliance today, but over the last, week and a half, I probably had 24 conversations with clients that just have no clue what to do. Right? They've got Microsoft EA renewals that are coming up, and Microsoft is like not budging on pricing. They've seen, increased prices, decreased discounts. Got clients that have IBM agreements where currency adjustments are just killing them right now. We've got Oracle Java compliance audits going on. And all of these things become a negotiation at some point in time, even when you're settling this compliance thing, right? And so one of the things that I'm talking a lot about is kind of like the mindset of dealing with this stuff, whether I'm negotiating, settling an audit, trying to actually figure out what's going on, right? So there's this concept, if you're a sports nut, like that, you can look at and see that, if I think about let's just talk hockey. I'm Canadian, so I love my hockey, right? So team's winning 3-0, right? So the team that they're playing, you're going to see one of two things that happen. Either that team plays to lose, right? Or they're going to play to win. So there's a difference between a losing team playing to lose and a losing team playing to win, right? And so when I say a losing team playing to lose, they're down 3-0. They don't want to get destroyed and lose 7-0. So they're playing to lose, but keep that loss at like a 3-0, or maybe try and get one goal to make it 3-1, right? Whereas a team that is playing to win, they're like, we're going to win. And it's a different game. It's a different way that they're approaching it, right? And they're out there trying to win. And, they go and those teams will win 4-3 in overtime, right? So it's definitely a mentality, right? And so if we look at these vendor games, the vendor's winning. They're doing price increases, changing the licensing agreements. The question is, as an organization, are you losing? Or are you playing not to lose? Or are you playing to win? right? So a lot of the times it's like, how do I do this? How do I win this audit? How do I win this negotiation? There's no silver bullet, folks, right? Like if anybody's telling you there's a silver bullet, there just is no silver bullet, especially today. You have to have data and you have to have strategy in order to go after this stuff, right? You have to really dive deep into it to understand your data, the deployment data. You got to understand these different license. If I can not flip the thing the wrong way here. I have to understand these different license metrics. I have to understand the different licensing programs. I have to understand the different commercial products and agreements, right? I can give you an example. It's a Microsoft one. We've talked to a client about looking at all their users. They've optimized and used data to optimize their compliance and license position. And now they're looking at it going, we potentially have, some downsizing coming. The economy is not great. We might have a spin-off, and we have a flex in seasonal workers. And so they're looking at it going, okay, well, how do we do that in EA? Because if we sign at 5,000 users, we're stuck there. We can't flex out if we add, we get stuck until our anniversary date. And we're like, let's go look at the CSP program. It's got some more flexibility. And like, oh, but we're not an enterprise agreement. I'm like, it doesn't matter. The EAA is just a vehicle to purchase. Let's go and figure out where the best right thing works and how does that work best for you and analyze it. And then we can compare the pros and cons of all the way that these things happen and use that to our advantage, right? So there's definitely ways you can do it, but you have to be playing to win, not playing to lose. And playing to lose, a lot of the times are, man, they like, if I go back to that company, right? They're like, we don't know what to do. We have no choice here. Like we basically got a 50% price increase, and they're trying to get them to increase the discount by 10% so that they're only paying 40% more. That's like playing to lose 3-1. That's not playing to win, right? So you have to really think through this, and I'm going to show you what a conversation of playing to win looks like in a little bit. Okay, so like I said, I'm a big hockey fan. We've already gone through this, so I was going to skip this one. But the one thing that I always like is like Wayne Gretzky, probably one of the best players ever. Always said you skate to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck has been. And the challenge with a lot of this, even when we're looking at, like when I look at these questions, right? Go back to these questions. A lot of these are like looking at where the puck was, not where it's going to, right? How do I monitor this? How do I track these one-offs? How do I, get accurate records? They're all important, don't get me wrong, but they're probably asking the wrong questions, quite honestly, in order to really drive this stuff. Right. So the question really is, where's the puck going and how do I get there versus where that puck is? So where's this thing going? Where are we going with the usage? Where's the vendor going with their licenses? What products are we seeing? What other opportunities do we have? What competitors are coming? How's AI going to play in all this? Like those are the things you want to be thinking about to sort of try and figure out, okay, where do we start to go and how do we move there? And that changes your focus, right? And how you're doing these things. Let me go back to my current slide here. One of the best analogies I can give is Moneyball, right? So this is a Brad Pitt movie. It was also a book by an author called Michael Lewis. If you haven't read it, it's actually a really good book, right? But basically, it talks about how the Oakland A's, were one of the more successful franchises for a number of years under this general manager, Billy Beane, with very limited budget. I think their budget was something like 40% of what the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox had. And, so how did they compete with them and win and make the playoffs? I don't think they won the World Series, but they made the playoffs like pretty much every year. And, how did they do that? They did that using data. They won using data. And this quote from Michael Lewis is absolutely perfect, right? It's like, basically says people in both fields operate with beliefs and biases. To the extent you can eliminate both and replace them with data, you gain a clear advantage. If you challenge conventional wisdom, you will find ways to do things much better than they're currently done. Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase this and put this into the context of software asset management, right? If you think about it, your software vendor and you and your company have beliefs and biases. The software company believes they know what's best for you. You know what's best for you, right? To the extent that you can get rid of those beliefs and change them with data, you're going to become fact-based and you gain the clear advantage in the negotiation with the vendor. Whether you're settling an audit, whether you're trying to figure out how to license and save money, whether you're negotiating a contract. The more data you have and the more you understand that data, you gain the advantage. When I was at Microsoft, how did I know to go get 20 to 30%? Because I had more data and better data than our clients. Right? You need to be the one with the more data, because then you can challenge the traditional way that things are being done. Is the enterprise agreement the right way to do it? Is the Office 365 the right license to do? Is the PVU the right way, or should we be looking at named users? We've got contracts that have been on PVU forever. Have we looked at whether the named user model makes more sense today? Have we looked at what the cloud costs are versus on-premise? I mean, 7 years ago, I was telling people, do not go to O365. They're going to do what they're doing today. They're going to get you. They're going to give you all kinds of great discounts to get in. Once you're on, they're just going to start increasing prices and decreasing discounts. And it all came true. Right. And now people are like, I'm stuck. I don't know how to get out of this stuff. Right. And so you have to be thinking about, how do I change that game? Right. So I want to talk about how this can be done. Right. This is a Microsoft example. Okay. But basically, they had a renewal, and it came up, and it basically, the renewal pricing had increased substantially through some of those things that we talked about, but also through some things that this client did, and they were at 30% above budget. Microsoft had given them their best and final. They weren't budging. I mean, they were trying to get them to budge on pricing. They were trying to get another 4 or 5%. They were playing to lose, right? And they were trying to get another 4 or 5%, and Microsoft wasn't budging. Right? They weren't moving. There was like, they escalated. They did all the things that, people think to do. They escalated. There was no offer, no change in price. There was no offer from Microsoft to look at what they were doing, how they were doing it. They were like, well, if you want to buy more, we'll happily look at displacement costs. Like, that doesn't help us with the problem that we're facing, right? And so we came in and we started reviewing their data. And what did we find? Right? We found that they had contractors, employees that were oversized. What do I mean by that? They went out and signed E5s to a bunch of frontline workers that could have been F3s, and were paying $40 a month a user more. And that decision at the time, was a decision where the business looked at it and said, it's only $40 a month. Right? And so you think about it and go, okay, across the user, that's not bad. But when that's 3,000 users, that's $1.5 million. Right? They have data to support changes. We found the data to support the changes, that they could change those E5s to F3s. Right? So there's data that supports that. We then took that to the directors to validate that, and they ended up reducing their EA price by 40%, even at the higher unit prices. Right? So I'm going to take a second, and I'm just going to pull up something. Just give me 1 second to re-log in here, because I want to show you how this sort of happens, right? Because it is all about data and what you can see in your data, right? And then knowing how to make sense of that data. Okay, so this is our tool that we use. It's called Slim 360 for if you haven't seen this before. But this is how we sort of go in and do this, right? We go in and we start to look for ways to drive cost out of the organization. And one of the things that you want to be able to do is understand usage data, right? So how, even with an IBM example, how did we know? We went and asked for usage data. We wanted to know how many people were actually accessing the dev environments. Why? Because we knew that we could change the way that things were being looked at if we moved away from that lens that they'd always been doing things inside of the PVU model. Right? At least for that environment. It made sense on the production environment because there was a lot more users. This is not going. A second here. Okay, so what's going to pop up here is, this is their O365. This is a demo account, so it's not a big one. This thing scales. We got 1 million plus users on one customer in this. But over here, you're going to see the SKUs that are assigned in the tenant, and over here, the services that make those up, right? So if I click on the Microsoft 365 E3, I'm actually going to be able to see the 48 things that make that up. So I'm going to see the Exchange Online, the SharePoint Online, the Office apps, and I can see the number of users that have been assigned that plan and the number that are actually using it. So you can see we have 86 here that are assigned and 52 are using. So I can actually dive in and start to look at what is going on in this customer. So if I look at Port here. No. Sorry, give me 1 second. It's been a while since I've been in here. So I can go in and actually see what these people are using, right? So I can go in and I can find what they're using, right? So I can go in and I can look and see, like, are they using all the products that are in the E3? Are they only using the products that are in the E1, right? So this is just a simple screen. If we look at the E5, so if they had the E5 across the board, we could see they're only using Power BI and a little bit of phone system, but they're paying for E5 for everything. I can look and see, what they're doing around the E3. I can look and see what they're doing around the E1, and then I can also dive deeper. I'm not going to pull that up because it's not what this is about today, but I can also go in and look deeper and see, are they using shared devices? Are they just sending emails? Are they not doing anything, right? So when I go back to this client that I was talking about over here, what we found was they had large pockets of users that were logging into the network, but not sending emails, not using Teams, not using SharePoint, not using OneDrive, not using Office. Right. And then when we analyzed those, we found out they were contractors. Well, they were throwing E5s on all these contractors. There's a better way to license them. We could look and show them that they're E5 users that should have been frontline workers based on job titles, because we do tagging in there. We were able to go in and show them based on their job titles that these roles should not have E5s because they don't even have PCs. They're using shared devices. And then when we found out that, yes, on that shared device, there's Office, and they need an Office because they have a workflow that they use in Excel, we're like, okay, that's great, but did you know there's 12 different ways that you can buy Office that we talked about? Doesn't mean that you need E5 for them all, right? And to make things even better for this company, they like capital expenditures, not OpEx. O365 is all OpEx. So we showed them how to go and do a license purchase of Office for those shared devices, put it in their capital budget, take that out of OpEx, decrease all those licenses. So that's how we reduce it by 40% at a very, very high level, right? But that's how you use the data to do that. You have to understand. So you see what we did there? We had to go in, we had to look at the usage, we had to get the data, look at the usage data. We had to understand the license types and the metrics that are used for those license types, right? Then we had to go in and look at the programs. Was the EA the right program? Did it make the most sense? Is the EA enterprise product definition the right product definition, or do we need to create profiles? The contractors are a great example of a profile that needed to be created, but they didn't have the data. They didn't know how to look at the data to figure it out. There are people, when we told them, like, oh yeah, I could tell you that our contractors are just logging into the network because all they're doing is plugging stuff in S&P. They don't do anything else, right? Or at least this one group of them, right? So it was like, okay, they knew that, but nobody really understood it to understand how that impacted from licensing, right? And so how did these guys change? Like if I go back to here, they were losing. They were playing not to lose. They were trying to get a few more points discount, right? They're trying to lose 3-1, right? How did they choose to play to win, right? They went and Microsoft wanted X and they got to Y regardless of the price Microsoft gave. That's how you go and win in overtime, 4-3. Now, if you had asked me when we started working with these guys, what the outcome would have been, I'd be like, we're going to play to win. What do we need to do? Right? What's our end goal? Our end goal was to get, to win 4-3 or to get to a certain number. And then we just went and start to look, how do we get there? But we didn't know. We never know in the client until we go in and start looking at the data, right? So just that slim tool that we had, I'm not going to do a big pitch, but we do what we call a 60-day proof of value, where we can, for a fairly cheap price, come in, connect to it, show you what opportunities there are to save money, look at contractors versus different user types and things like that, and help you figure out how you can actually decrease your cost on O365. We do the same sort of thing on Azure as well. Like I said, it's a low cost, small time commitment out of a team that's doing this. It takes 15 minutes to set up, a few meetings over the course of those 60 days. We need 60 days so we can collect some good data, and then we can show you how to impact your licenses. I always tell people, do not wait until your renewal. That's the number one time people want to do this. And yes, it makes sense to do it, but sometimes it gets late too. Like we think we could have impacted that customer more than 40%, but we didn't have enough time. Right? We ran out of time. So we've set them up so that we can maybe take some more out next year, but we didn't have enough time to sort of get through all the data and all the conversations that needed to be had, right? So don't wait, and don't even wait till renewal. because you can impact this stuff on anniversary. I've done other webinars where we talk about EAs and how you can impact stuff on your anniversary date and stuff like that. But you definitely can. So if anybody's interested, just hit me up, Mike at metricsdata360.com, and happy to have somebody give you a call to chat about this program. Now, the next piece that we've talked about is contracts, right? And so many people think that an EA is licensing. I don't know how many times I have conversations where it's like, I'm buying my licensing, it's an EA agreement. It's not. That's the vehicle that you buy. That's the vehicle you purchase through, right? It's going to tell you the license metrics. It's going to tell you the price. It's the vehicle to purchase. It's not what you're purchasing. What I'm purchasing is Office 365. It's Tivoli. It's Oracle database. It's whatever it is, Salesforce Pro licenses, whatever it is. That's what you're buying, right? So understanding how a contract works is very important, and how to look at the contract for the licensing stuff. Okay. And so I'm going to pick on IBM for a minute, because IBM actually puts stuff up on their public website, which is nice of them. I think I may need to just jump out of this, go over here for a second. So if you hit that agreement that I have on the link there, it's going to show you the relationship of their agreements. And if you look at this, this is sort of ugly, right? It's like, what the heck does all this mean, right? So it's like, I got this IPLA license agreement. There's these different agreements underneath it. Underneath those are transaction documents with license information, program specific, service descriptions, terms of use, proof of entitlements, ordering documents, quotes, all this sort of stuff, right? So I'm going to go to Passport Advantage, because that's the most common one, right? So I have a Passport Advantage agreement, and underneath the agreement, I get attachments and addendums or amendments, right? So I might have like monthly licenses or subscription licenses. So I might have an amendment that says, here's how the Passport agreement works, but if I'm doing subscriptions, this is how it works. And then underneath those are the terms and conditions. And if you sort of think about these are what we've ordered and what we've paid. Those are in the ordering documents. And then it's the terms of, proof of entitlements, or what we own. And then you get into things like terms of use, which is how we can use the product. So that's sort of all that stuff we walked through today is inside of this contract structure, right? So I'm going to go to the Passport Advantage for a second. Let's open that link. And IBM, thankfully or nicely, puts their contracts on the website, right? So I can go here and I can pull up an IBM Passport Advantage agreement. Now, when I'm optimizing, I want to just show you guys real quickly how you actually go through these contracts to look at them to optimize, right? So the problem a lot of the times are, most of the times when I talk to people, I'm like, okay, have you actually read your contract? And they're like, no. Right? I'm like, okay, well, let's actually go through the contract. And then they're like, well, there's a lot of stuff in there, and I don't even know how to read it or whatnot. And I'll walk them through. So one of the things we do with a lot of times with our Microsoft contract customers is we actually walk them through the EA agreements and explain them to them, right? And then show them why certain things Microsoft say are wrong, and how to get around that. Now, there is a legal contract, which this is, and then there's the business aspect of the contract. Okay. And so what I mean by that is, when I'm going to read this from a software asset management and compliance perspective, I'm going to look for the business terms. The legal terms are important, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to look for the business terms in here. Okay. And so I will just go through and I'll read this, but I'm really kind of skimming it, right? So, for instance, IPAA acceptance, right? What is this? Okay, this just looks like it tells us who can buy, like you got to own the company 50%, by more than 50%. So that's legal stuff. Content and data protection. Okay, that's important, and legal is going to care about that. But from a licensing and compliance perspective, I probably just want to read this to make sure I understand it. But again, it's not telling me how to license anything, right? It's just telling this is all legal stuff. Warranties, again, important, but from a software asset management and compliance perspective, don't really need to read through this. Taxes, important that we pay our taxes, but I don't need to read that. Now, there's a section here in verification. I'm going to pay close attention to that, because here's the license verification. So if we're getting audited, I want to understand what this says. This is their rights to audit us, right? It tells us what we have to do. What are we responsible for? So this is about compliance. So I would want to really read this and make sure I understand this clause right here, because this is how we prove compliance. This is how we verify it, right? So there's some volume pricing stuff here. I'm going to want to understand this. If there's different levels, different programs I can purchase through, right? So you can see there's a relationship volume, there's a suggested volume pricing. I'm going to want to understand that stuff. Again, I'm going through this quick, but I'm going to want to understand that because, sometimes if maybe I just purchase a little bit more, it puts me up to another level, and that level is a 7% delta. That little bit more can save us money, right? So again, I want to watch this stuff. If we're going to pull licenses out, if I pull out everything that I'm thinking, like that client we are talking about, if we pulled out everything that they were thinking, they would have went down a level. So we left to stick at a pricing level that impacted everything, right? So again, I'm just going to go through this and go, what's important? Oh, points. Okay, cool. So now I know products have points. Do I care about limited liability and intellectual property protection? Not from a compliance perspective, from a legal perspective, sure. Termination, if I want to try and get out of this and maybe renegotiate, I might want to see if there's something in there that I could use to terminate a contract that maybe is not great for us to renegotiate. Might not have anything, but again, I'll read through that, see if it is. Again, okay, there's some license information, there's subscription and support. So I'm going to read this stuff, probably go to these links and try and understand them, right? So you get the point. I can go through a license contract fairly quickly. Now, one of the things that I'm looking for that isn't in the Passport Advantage, it's buried in some of these other links, are those license metrics, right? So how do I count the licenses and things like that so that I can figure out how many I need to buy? Right. And so I really want to understand that. That's how we knew, okay, they could do PVU or named user for this product. Let's take a look at both to kind of figure out which one makes the most sense for this client. Okay. So that at a very high level is how you look at a contract. Right. And then how you license is in the product terms. Right. So with IBM on that one site, you saw those documents that I was pointing to beneath the surface. Those are kind of product terms. Microsoft has what they call product terms. Others call them product use rights. They all have a little bit different name, but they all are sort of the same thing. So I'm just going to pull this one up real quickly as well. I think I have to let me link off that one, but let me just do this, right? Because I want to show you this, because again, you have to understand this stuff, or somebody on your team has to understand this stuff to understand what's going on, right? So, how did we come up with that office thing? So this customer was in an enterprise agreement. So Microsoft makes you pick that. And I went and looked at Office. Okay. Oh, is it not? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So, I just went and looked, searched Office over here. Right. And then it's going to tell me what the use rates are, what the product terms are. So if I want to look at Office desktop apps, I'm going to select that. And then it's going to give me all the information, right? Why this is not going, it should. Let's go into the universal license terms and see, or I think maybe my internet's a little slow. Give this a second. Anyways, it's going to come in and it's going to tell me the different ways that I can license. Not sure why it's giving me a hard time right now. Okay, so it's going to tell me the different ways that I can license. It's going to tell me the programs that I can buy through. So I would see in here that it's included in user licenses for O365, that it's device-based licenses. So you can see here, right? Like now I can kind of start to see where it is. How do I license? What prior versions there are? Do I get work at home rights? What can I do with it? What are the use rights for it? They have an office, home, and student version. Cool. Maybe we have a lot of students. I want to go look at that. Can't use that in a corporate environment, but you kind of get the point, right? Here's how the desktop licensing model works. So this is telling us basically how we account. Tells us what software assurance is and what that means, right? So again, I can go through here and I can look and see at all the different ways that Office can be purchased, right? And how that can be done. And then you have to know a little bit to know that I got to go and look for the Office apps. Anyways, you get the point. I got to go look for the Microsoft Enterprise apps which they bury outside of Office now with the rename. But again, you get the point. I can go in here and I can see how I count, what the metrics are, what programs I can buy through. So when we were trying to solve that problem for Office, we could go and say, like, these are your different options. And then they would come back and say, well, what about this? And like, yep, it's covered. Here it is, because this is where the product terms tell you that you can do these things, right? So that's sort of how product terms play into this. And so if you look at this, if we want to put this all together, this is how we look at this thing, okay? Basically, what ends up happening is it's all kind of like a cycle, right? You have to understand the license type, right? So is it perpetual? Is it subscription? What's the license metric? Is it device-based, user-based? What happens if I install it on a server? That sort of stuff. I have to be able to go out and look at our deployment data if we have it out there today. So if I go back to my IBM example that we've been talking about, we went and looked at PVU based. We went and looked at, even though it's not deployment data, it's, I should have deployment data/data, but we went to look at users and we ran user reports on the product to figure out who was using it so that we could look at what if we changed the PVU in that dev environment to named users because there were so few users over there. Then I have to look at my contracting vehicle. Am I buying it through volume licensing? Am I buying it online? I might have different rights. Am I buying it through an EA or a CSP program? Because I may have different rights. And then I'm going to moneyball, use data, and I'm going to play to win. Right? And this is how you win compliance, audits, and negotiations. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this back up there. We do have an offer on O365. We have all kinds of things like this. If there's something that you're specifically interested in looking at, like IBM or Oracle Java, we have all kinds of different assessments and engagements that we can help with. But if anybody's interested, please reach out. I'll leave the line open for a couple more minutes to see if there's any questions. I did see one or two that I answered come in. Okay, excellent. Otherwise, everybody have a great day. Hopefully, you found this informative. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Mike at metricsdata, metrixdata360.com. And I'll be happy to either answer your questions or get you in touch with somebody on my team that can help out. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.